Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the February 18th version of On Track Live webinar for NCTA. We really appreciate everybody taking time out of your schedule to join us today. We've got a great speaker lined up for you. As is our tradition, I'll probably open up with a couple of little bit of shameless self-promotion for NCTA here before we kick off. Just want to remind everybody that the spring and O&M meetings are coming up here in April. The speaker lists are 99% set at this point. All of those speakers are on the website. We've got some really good ones lined up for our joint plenary session on the crossover day that has all the O&M and spring people in the room at the same time. We've got Blake Deely, who's the Deputy Executive Director of the White House Energy Dominance Council coming, and he'll give us some views on what's going on with the Trump administration, coal activities and so forth. Obviously, this is a very big year for the merger proposal, the Union Pacific Norfolk Southern merger proposal. UP announced yesterday that, as many of you know, that the initial application for that was rejected as incomplete by the Surface Transportation Board. Union Pacific announced yesterday, actually, that they will be refiling that on April 30th. So we'll be chatting about this just prior to the application being refiled with the STB. We do have representatives from Union Pacific confirmed, and also BNSF, who has taken a counter position to the merger. They'll both be there to make their cases. Bring your popcorn. So it'd be a great meeting to come sit through. We also have some folks from the Association of American Railroads. They won't be talking about the merger, but they've got some other good rail stuff to share with us. And of course, a number of other great speakers that cover our market updates and things like that. So again, turning into a very strong looking conference. Encourage everybody to get registered, get your arrangements made. 2 months will go by very quickly, so we encourage you to get there. Also, don't forget to register for golf. Very good golf course, and our scholarship scramble to benefit the scholarship program will come about. So that's I'll leave it at that. That's your commercial today. I just want to get straight to our guest today. We're very pleased to have with us Stuart Burgess. Stuart's the chairman and co-founder of Burgex Mining Consultants. And actually met Stuart at a coal event in Pittsburgh last fall, where he gave this presentation. I found it very interesting because working in Washington, which is an occupational hazard for me, the critical minerals recovery is the big shiny object in the room right now. Everybody is looking at trying to reshore these capabilities, reduce dependence on other countries. And Stuart has done a lot of work in surveying the universe out there. And so without further ado, Stuart, let me turn it over to you to go through your slide deck. And for those who have questions, I've got the chat box open. Please feel free to type in questions in the chat box, or when we get to the end of Stuart's presentation, we'll have a little Q&A session. You can also do the wavy handy thingy or unmute yourselves and so forth to ask questions for a little discussion at the end there. So, Stuart, I'll quit flapping my gums now and turn it over to you.
Thanks, John. Yeah, excited to be here. I've worked in the mining world for 20 years now, and it's been really interesting, been particularly on the bulk materials side, coal, aggregates, industrial minerals, things like that. Transportation is a huge piece of the economic puzzle that we try to solve. So it's always interesting to kind of, learn a little bit more about it. And, it's particularly when it comes to railroads and things, it's a big mystery to everyone outside the industry what actually goes on. And so even just sitting in on things like this, I learn a lot, and it's fun to be able to share some of my knowledge and learn a little bit too. So a little bit about my presentation. I'm going to talk about a little bit about myself, about coal and its hidden assets, a little bit about the supply chain from mine to magnet and what are rare earths anyway, and how are they important, and how do they turn from something that's in such a small concentration in the earth into products that are actually used, and then talk a little bit about the future outlook and what I see coming, and hopefully try to separate a little bit of the hype from the reality. So a little bit about myself. Been in mining for about 20 years now. Started Burgex Mining Consultants in 2010. We started out with mineral rights acquisitions, and I had a hobby rappelling into abandoned mines and sampling them, um, which was a lot of fun, but pretty niche. Since then, to stay in business, we've grown and diversified quite a bit into aggregates, energy minerals, and industrial minerals. We really focus on a lot, and we do a little bit of everything now, from engineering to valuations work, due diligence, and particularly right now, we're doing a lot in critical minerals. It is definitely the shiny object on the hill and a big topic of geopolitical discussions around the world right now. When it comes to this particular topic, I have been a skeptical historically. And a lot of that stems from something probably a lot of you are aware of. Traditionally, in rare earths, there's been a lot of hype. So, the Ramaco Brook mine, which we'll talk about here in a minute, these articles drove me crazy. And I don't know if it was an intentional PR campaign or the media, putting a spin on things. But a lot of these articles generate a lot of buzz in the mining industry, and the way they were presented, it didn't really make recovering rare earths from coal look like something that was feasible. And so it fed a lot to my skepticism. These articles where former Wall Street banker buys a coal mine for $2 million and it's worth $37 billion and things like that, that didn't necessarily reflect a lot of the truth of the situation. And so originally I was very skeptical. I had to really dig a lot deeper to see what the reality was on the ground. And we'll get into that in a minute. But backing up a little bit, so the rare earths conversation and the critical minerals conversation relies a lot on this East versus West, China versus the United States. And for good reason. If you look at this chart from the USGS on the right, there's a long list of important minerals that we are almost entirely reliant on China for, and a lot that we are almost entirely reliant on imports for. So, and that runs the gamut from the rare earths to antimony, which you'll hear a lot about in the United States these days, to tungsten, barite, mica, germanium, fluorspar. And it's not just the mining that's occurring in China, it's the processing. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But you can see here on the chart on the left, China dominates global rare earth element production just across the board. There's some minimal production in the United States. There's some in Australia. There's some in Africa here and there, but China is by and large the leader in this. And that drives a lot of the conversation now. So looking at coal, I think backing up a little bit, rare earths are everywhere. They're not rare, but they're rare in economical concentrations. And so we measure rare earths in parts per million. And you'll see typically a lot of the ion absorption clays that are mined in China for rare earths are around 1,000 parts per million per ton of material. And that is all of the rare earths combined is around 1,000. And then we have, looking at coal, so back to the Brook mine, the lower seven seam on an ash basis, which is basically means it's been burned and concentrated, is around 5,000 parts per million. So it's significantly more enriched with rare earths than the typical ion absorption clay from China. And then there's the underclay that's common throughout central Appalachia, and it's around 3,000. So significantly more concentrated as well. And then some of the other, what you would consider to be waste materials of coal mining, like AMD treatment sludge, coal prep fine refuse, coal fly ash, and then just coal itself, all have varying degrees of rare earth concentrations. But you can see even just average coal in the United States has about 66 parts per million. And then it obviously gets concentrated when it's burned, or the rare earths concentrate in the layers above or below the coal. But you'll typically find that the same processes that create the rare earths and distribute them are associated with the same processes that create coal. Um, and pretty interesting, particularly the idea that traditional waste from coal mining and burning could actually contain economical concentrations of rare earth is really fascinating to me, and something that really got me interested in looking at what's the real feasibility and how would this work. So talking about rare earths, they feed a global supply chain. So rare earths themselves aren't really useful for much. They have to be refined and smelted and then made into rare earth magnets, alloys, special metals, things like that. And this is where, while China dominates rare earth mining, they control even more of the supply chain. So, where those rare earths go after they've been mined. So, in final end use products, China controls 70% of the manufacturing process, rare earth magnets, 92%, alloy and metal making, 92%, refining and separation, 90%. So even when rare earths are mined in the United States and in Africa, the final concentrates are shipped to China for the final refining. And then the mining itself, 60% in China. So you can see the United States has a handhold in a lot of this, but they're far from a dominant player, particularly in the magnet manufacturing and the end use products, as well as the alloys and the refining. And these are things that are being addressed and tackled, but they're complex, and these are not easy processes. And a lot of the knowledge and expertise still lies in China. So, talking a little bit about the waste to value, and I think this is a particularly exciting component for looking at the future of coal beyond just energy generation. There's billions of tons of coal byproducts that are already mined, stored, and permitted in some fashion. Um, these can be, overburden piles, fly ash refuse, AMD sludge. They can contain concentrations of rare earths, and a lot of these haven't been studied and looked at. And then the technologies are being developed to actually recover these rare earths in lower concentrations. And this is being applied to at a pilot scale now to actually clean up legacy sites. So it has a dual benefit of turning waste to value and cleaning up and restoring the land along the way. So a little bit about case studies. So back to Ramaco's Brook Mine. Some of those early articles talked about a Wall Street broker who bought a mine, and it turns out it's the CEO of Ramaco, which is a known and established coal miner. They were aware of the rare earths there. They knew what they were doing. It wasn't just a surprise find. And they've actually been working on proving it up. So it's the largest known unconventional rare earth deposit in the US. I say known because geology is always surprising, and there could be others out there, particularly because this is such a segment of rare earth exploration that's been not very looked at, and it's underexplored. The rare earths hosted in the coal seams and varying concentrations in the different seams. It's also found in the carbonaceous shells that are associated with the coal seams. This would be the first new rare earth mine in 70 plus years. And it's state supported with a $6 million Wyoming grant to build a pilot plant. And it has a projected $134 million annual EBITDA. And interestingly, to kind of put a fly in the soup for Ramaco, there was recently filed, just in the last couple of weeks, a class action lawsuit against Ramaco by shareholders who, I think, similarly to what I originally thought that some of the hype around it was a little bit inflationary, that it made a lot of promises. And so this will be an interesting case to see what Ramaco's plans are, what they've actually done, and how much of that narrative they actually control. But the litigation, basically, they allege that Ramaco has made a lot of promises about developing a mine, and really they're still just doing an exploration program. So that's a very new development since I made this presentation. It will be interesting to see, and I will be paying attention to see what their plans are, what exploration has been done. But from someone in the mining and the mineral exploration industry, these projects take a long time, and it's not uncommon for shareholders to get impatient. We have a whole, lingo and technology around what's called the Lassonde curve, which is kind of the hype cycle that a lot of mining companies go through when they discover a new project and prove it up. And so we tend to take kind of a longer view on development, and you can have a mine in development for 10 years. It's not uncommon, but this one will be interesting to see. I'm keeping a close eye on it. Talking a little bit about some of that waste recovery, there's a company called ReElement, and they are in a joint venture with American Resources Corporation, and they've built a mobile extraction units that can build concentrates from coal refuse and slurry ponds on site, and then they create, it's kind of a hub and spoke model where they have a central mill that will actually take these concentrates and then separate and purify them further. And through their joint venture with American Resources Corporation, they have over 30,000 acres of legacy coal lands available to deploy this technology. And it's in the pilot scale, and some of the early testing they've done, it's producing 80 to 98% high purity rare earth oxides, which can then be concentrated even further as we build out that infrastructure here in the United States, or they can be currently shipped to China where they can undergo final processing and refining. This isn't a picture of one of their actual units. I couldn't find one, and I reached out and wasn't able to get one, but this is just an AI's interpretation of what it would look like. So for any engineers out there watching, it probably doesn't make sense. But essentially, the idea is that they'll be able to bring in modular containers these smaller units. They can move them from site to site and then move the concentrates to do the final processing. I think it's a really exciting development. They've been able to raise significant capital for the pilot plants. They just did another capital raise in late 2025 that was successful, and so they're deploying this on a small scale. And if it's successful, they'll continue to deploy it and build more units. And they certainly have plenty of feedstock. And then this is a really interesting one. So case study number 3 is acid mine drainage to resource. West Virginia Water Research Institute and the West Virginia Department of Environmental Protection have partnered to create a pilot plant that extracts rare earths from AMD treatment sludge. So this is your classic acid mine drainage sludge that's collected in ponds, and it traditionally treated as a hazardous byproduct. It's a liability. This water needs to be treated, or the elements need to settle out of it before they can release it back into the environment. So this actually takes something that's a liability and turns it into a potential asset. And again, produces 90% purity rare earth element concentrates. One site sludge that they evaluated, they estimated contained $850,000 in recoverable rare earth elements. Obviously, they're still working on the economics of that, so it'd be interesting to see at what cost they can produce that. And then it has that dual benefit, which is great. And then once again, a scalable model. So this can be deployed really thousands of mine sites throughout the United States and not just in Appalachia. So a lot of potential here, and this is exciting. A friend of mine is a professor at Virginia Tech, and they are also working with the Department of Energy to assess not only these pilot programs, but other potential areas that could be used to extract critical minerals, not just raw resources like the Brook Mine, but looking at these AMD processing, other waste processing, and then from the utilities, fly ash, bottom ash, things like that, which already have a beneficial use for pozzolans as a supplementary cementatious material. I've had to say that one a lot of times to be able to get it right. It's a mouthful. But being able to extract rare earths from that as well could be really interesting, and potentially it could be used for both. So very exciting. So these technical innovations are really powering this transition and taking something that was previously impossible, or certainly, if not impossible, uneconomic, and turning it into something that could potentially be a reality on an economic scale within the next few years. Some of these technologies will work, some won't. That's how this works, but they will find some that work and they will be deployed, and we'll be able to produce rare earths from some of these coal waste streams, and then potentially coal itself, which could be done at a much higher volume. The key technologies, the modular mobile processing, that hub and spoke model, I think is really effective. New chemical separation technologies that replace costly solvent extraction. They're a lot more environmentally friendly. They're easier to permit. They have less input costs. Byproduct recoveries, not just of rare earth elements, but alumina, silica, pozzolans, like we talked about, and then other building materials. There's projects to make lightweight aggregate from some of these waste streams. There's projects to make bricks. Those add a lot to the project economics. And then automation and real-time sensors optimize extraction efficiency. You could throw AI into that category as well. And then the hub and spoke models and centralized refinery. So this creates an economic shift, not just in recovering from coal waste streams, but actually recovering rare earths from coal itself, like the Brook Mine. So global rare earth demand is set to really skyrocket, and along with that, prices of rare earths, primarily through magnet demand, oxides, U.S. policy funding. Even since I created this presentation, there's been the Project Vault and bringing back strategic mineral stockpiles to the United States and setting a price floor for some of these will be a big boon to the industry, as well as direct U.S. policy funding through Department of Energy grants, taking direct equity stakes in some of these companies, which we're starting to see, and just relaxing policy with environmental regulation and things like that to allow some of these operations to get permitted and go into production much more quickly. So this is my pie in the sky investor chart. There's real data to back this, but the reality is never quite this smooth or exciting. Rare earth prices are set to, prices and demand are set to increase dramatically over the next 20 years, and recovery costs are expected to decline. I think in this chart, the demand is probably a bit inflated. It's going to be more rocky than that. And I would expect demand to approximately double over the next 20 years. I'm not sure if it's going to triple. And then I think on the recovery side, we will see significant drops in recovery costs for rare earth elements, especially as we near shore or onshore refining capabilities and processing capabilities, magnet manufacturing, things like that. But I think this may be a little bit ambitious in how much they're going to drop. But either way, the economics are improving quite a bit. And with some of these pilot programs, I think a lot of the coal producers and even a lot of the utilities who are consuming coal are looking at recovering rare earths as a potential future avenue to not only take care of some potential environmental liabilities and some legacy issues, but also enhance their bottom line and upgrade production, which is excellent. So I think the coal industry is uniquely positioned to take advantage of these opportunities for five reasons, really five pillars. Land and rights. Coal companies have hundreds of thousands of acres, if not millions. I'm sure it's in the low millions of established ownership, where they own the mineral rights, they own the surface rights. A lot of these areas are already permitted. There's enough known coal reserves that could be economic or sub-economic that could be economic with a little bit of a rare earth kicker. These assets are already held, they're mapped, they're accessible. It's just a matter of going in and doing more exploration to see what the rare earth concentrations look like. A lot of these areas are already permitted, but aside from that, the coal industry they have decades of experience navigating permitting, be it MSHA, NEPA, working with the EPA, working with state agencies, fighting NIMBY, which is ubiquitous these days. The industry has lots of experience and they know how to get things done. And then on top of that, many rare earth projects can qualify under FAST 41 and they can get fast tracked, which is excellent. And they may be able to get fast tracked for rare earth production and coal production faster than they would be able to just for coal production. And then infrastructure and logistics. And I'm talking to the right crowd for that. The foundations are built. There's existing rail spurs, haul roads, power hookups, water systems, processing facilities already exist in coal regions. Some of these just need to be repurposed and they're ready to go. Coal prep plants, loadouts could be converted for rare earth concentrating and logistics. A lot of that infrastructure is already there. Some of the permits are already there. And then, a lot of these areas could be converted fairly easily. Infrastructure is extremely expensive to put in, especially rail, things like that. So anywhere that it's existed and being underutilized, this is a great way to revitalize some of these areas. And then there's the skilled resource and the skilled workforce. The skills of mining coal mining and processing coal can be just modified a little bit to be able to process rare earth elements. So particularly at the Brook mine, they're mining coal seams and there's nothing that really changes on the mining side. It's really just all in the processing side. And so there's a skilled workforce already ready to do all that. There's training efficiency, minimal retraining. There's a good workforce. They already understand handling. They understand safety. They understand MSHA. And so it's really just getting more specific in the processing end and the final steps. And then there's community and political support. So coal companies are embedded in their communities. They're an important part of their community. And in a lot of areas where they may be struggling and their economics may be on thin ice, something like this could really help, particularly if they're facing environmental liabilities and things like that, which could be cleaned up potentially at a profit or at least at a break even where they're not true liabilities. They become more of an asset, or at the worst, they become a wash, which is great. And then there's bipartisan backing, which I'll talk about a little more in a minute. Both state and federal leaders recognize coal-based rare earth recovery is a win-win. And it's something that's good for everyone. So a little bit of a summary on how I overcame my skepticism, and now I'm less skeptical. I still have some skepticism, particularly because we're in a pilot phase on a lot of these projects. And once they get into full commercial production and work the bugs out and produce good revenues and profitability for multiple quarters, then that skepticism will start to decrease even more. But some key developments that have helped. In 2010, China put in an export embargo amid a trade dispute. And this kind of woke the United States up to the reliance that they had on China and rare earth elements. And between 2017 and 2019, trade tensions got more pronounced, they got stronger. Mountain Pass Mine, which is the largest conventional rare earth mine in the United States and the longest running, they've been able to get a lot of revitalization. They're a client of ours, so we've got to see them really be able to fire things up again and get running under a good footing. By 2019, U.S. rare earth output hit 26,000 tons after years of near zero production. In 2022, the U.S. invoked the Defense Production Act and issued executive orders to fund and fast track domestic mining and processing of critical minerals. This was under the last administration, so this really is a bipartisan issue. In 2023, a massive rare earth deposit was discovered at Ramaco's Brook Mine. It's the first primary rare earths find in decades, and it's not just hype. They're actually doing work there, and we'll see more about what's going on there as this lawsuit unfolds and they continue to focus on getting their pilot plant up and running. 2024 U.S. Rare earth mine output surged to 45,000 tons, which is the second highest globally. So we're solidly behind China, but back in that number 2 spot. Then in 2025, the Brook Mine officially opened on a pilot scale, and multiple rare earth separation and magnet facilities are underway throughout the United States that can actually consume these rare earths and turn them into the final products. So there's really an evolution going on in coal. I think it's very exciting. I think the rare earths is a big part of it. I'm excited also about the building materials and other things that can be made from coal outside of just energy, which it's proving with the weather we've had. It's snowing here in Salt Lake, but the weather that we've had, particularly in the eastern United States, I see a lot of stories in the news about coal saving the day again, as it does every cold winter. And so I think as an energy source, it's definitely not going anywhere anytime soon, but it's good to see that there are future uses on the horizon. And I think this is not just my opinion being in the mining industry, but it's spreading to the general public as well. Late 2024 polling shows a broad consensus on critical minerals. 83% of U.S. opinion leaders, including 71% of Democrats and 95% of Republicans, agreed that expanding domestic mining should be a top priority for critical minerals. This is really unprecedented. It highlights a shift in sentiment. Of course, there's still a lot of NIMBY. I imagine it's prevalent in transportation as well, but not in my backyard sentiment. So a lot of people are pro U.S. mining, but they don't want it to happen in their state or in their area. But as things shift, I can see that loosening up a little bit. And then in early 2025, a national survey found that 70% of Americans favor ramping up U.S. mineral production to reduce reliance on China, with only 12% opposed, which marks a major public opinion shift. And I think this is really important. People are tying the importance of mining and minerals to their livelihoods and to the health of the U.S. economy. And that's important. It's gone from being something that's just forgotten about, or, it just, minerals appear, the electricity comes from the electrical outlet, the copper in the car comes from the copper store. It's not all mining. I think we're starting to get back to some of the basics on where things come from and how they get there, which is important. All right. Any questions?
Well, I know I always have some, but remind everybody too, the chat box is open if you're shy and want to type something in there, or else, like I say, unmute yourself and join the conversation. Stuart, thank you for that presentation. It's very helpful. Just wanted to drill down on a couple of points. I mean, so we've really got two challenges to reducing the dependence on China, right? It's number one is recovering the materials that we need, but then number two is building the processing capability, correct?
Correct, yeah.
Is building the processing capability arguably harder than building the resource extraction capability?
I think so. Yeah, I do. All of the Virtually all of the refineries and smelters for rare earths and the downstream facilities that build the magnets and everything else are in China. And China has a great educational system for engineers and process engineers and all of that we just don't have in the United States. So I did a study a few months ago and found that China is graduating approximately 20,000 mining professionals. So, graduates, will say mining graduates and mining engineering, economic geology, metallurgy, and processing. And the rest of the Western world, um, Canada, the United States, Australia, graduates about 400 a year. So 400 to 20,000. So one of the big difficulties with that is we know how to mine, we know how to get the material, and we know how to concentrate it. But the advanced processing and refining, all that knowledge and experience lies in China. So, and of course, they're not going to just ship over their best experts to help us build our own supply chain because it's a major strategic advantage that they control that. And so getting that expertise here and being able to build that stuff out, there's a lot of learning and a lot of trial and error to make up for not having the experienced people to do it. So that's why I think it's harder than just the mining and concentrating, is that gap in knowledge is a big part of the extraction that's missing.
Our Interior Secretary, I've heard him say it 3 times now. It's one of his go-to lines. We graduated 36,000 lawyers in this country last year and 300 mining engineers.
Yep.
What's wrong with that picture? So it's not just a capital constraint of you're going to have to build all these factories. It's
Yeah.
having the human capital to deploy the financial capital is the bottleneck as you see it.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. Because we have the current administration has unlocked a lot of funds to solve this problem, and there's major companies like Tesla is a great example that would love to have a domestic supply of rare earths and magnets and all that, and they can bring the capital, but the bottleneck is having the people to actually deploy it and build these factories and design them.
Interesting. And on both the processing and the previous extraction side of things, I know there's a lot of research going on. I was actually at Nettle a couple of weeks ago, looking at some of the research that they've got going on there, and it's amazing. But when you boil it down, this isn't rocket science, right? I mean, a lot of the core technologies that are used in both the recovery and the processing of these materials are stuff that we can improve on it, but it's stuff we've been doing for a long time, right? It's not reinventing a wheel.
No, no, and there are some newer technologies. So we've relied a lot on solvent extraction previously, which is more of a chemical process, and now we're getting better at other extraction methods that rely less on that. Good examples, lithium, um, direct lithium extraction now, where you can just take the lithium out of the brine instead of having to evaporate the entire brine and scrape it and process it. Things like that are moving the needle and they're certainly helping, but a lot of it's not rocket science. It's really an economic exercise. So a lot of these rare earths, we're talking about having to mine 100 tons of material to get pounds of rare earth. And so it's getting it dialed in enough to where you can do it economically. That's the difficulty. And then the processes, they tend to be historically very heavy on a lot of different chemicals, and there's a lot of different permitting, a lot of different considerations for that. And so as they get more simple, or we look at these hub and spoke models and things, we can reduce a lot of that along the way. So that's where things are changing. But you're right, the core extraction technologies that we're relying on are decades old.
let's take, I'm interested in the impact on the overall value chain, right? I mean, we tend to, those of us in this business tend to look at our silos, right? If I'm a coal miner, I'm looking at the coal production. If I'm a utility, I'm looking at the combustion and the electricity generation, all that. But doesn't this have an ability to create value all the way through that value chain? I'll give you a good example. Let's say coal ash recovery. There's already a vibrant established market that consumes millions of tons of coal ash for building materials every year.
Yeah.
If we can add the economics of extracting rare earth elements from that ash and still leave it in a state where we can still use it for those applications, doesn't that the economic value in both of those baskets contribute to each other? And are those the kind of solutions we should be looking at?
Yeah. Yeah. Anywhere where you can layer economic benefits on top of each other, you get uh, it's a well-worn saying, but that's a 1 + 1 = 3 situation where you actually get an outsized impact by being able to combine things like that. And I don't know. I mean, I throw out being able to. I mentioned being able to extract the rare earths and the pozzolans from the same fly ash and stuff. I don't know how feasible some of that is, but in places where it's possible, or you take the fly ash and the bottom ash at the same time, and you can create some of the bottom ash when it's been processed for rare earths can be used to supplement the fly ash and things like that. If you can cover operating expense with the revenues from a byproduct, that just enhances the whole supply chain. Because, ultimately, whether you're buying rare earths, rare earth concentrate, or you're buying coal, or you're buying pozzolans or whatever, you're looking at the delivered costs to get it there. And so along that supply chain, anywhere you can generate additional revenue, it helps. And even if it's just on the side of reducing environmental liabilities and cleaning up sites, which would ordinarily be a cost, and you can actually zero it out through this, you can lease your mine drainage impoundment to the local university and they'll extract the rare earths, and maybe you'll make a little bit of money on it, but they'll clean up the site and take that over. That all flows into your ultimate profitability and reduces your costs. So there's lots of different ways that interacts.
And by extension, if we're successful in pursuing those kind of value chain approaches, it should also make coal as an energy resource more competitive, right? I mean, as an old ash salesman, I used to try to convince utility people that they weren't really in it for generating the electrons. They were in it, the electricity was the byproduct, and the coal ash is what we should really be focusing on. But to a degree, that could be true here, right? I mean, if we develop a vibrant market for the rare earth elements that come out of the ash, that creates an economic incentive for folks who use coal to generate electricity to use more of it.
Yeah, absolutely. No, the beauty of it is when you burn the coal, you're concentrating the rare earth elements. And so in that process, you're actually creating a concentrate. So I showed that the number 7 seam of the Brook mine is 5,000 parts per million. That's a multiplier and the ash basis because it's been concentrated. And so I think they're looking at ways to get that ash basis through other concentration and not just burning it. But a simple solution is you co-locate with the utility who burns that seam and concentrates your rare earths. So yeah, definitely it changes those economics a little bit. And I think I've heard rumors that there are some companies who are looking at potentially permitting and building new coal plants to do that specifically for that purpose. But once again, it's a yet to be seen, but it does change the economics. I mean, at a minimum, the value of the ash goes up substantially when there's more than one market for it and they're competing for it.
Right. But it's not just coal and coal ash, right? Aren't there other mining wastes out there that also or other mining wastes and other materials out there that might also be rich in these things? Are we coal and coal ash people going to be competing with other mining companies for the same value proposition.
Yeah, it's going to be quite competitive. So the beauty in the coal is those five pillars that I talked about. The lands are there, they're permitted, most of the materials are already mined, and so you can take all that out, and those are things that competitors won't have if they're permitting a new monazite deposit, or there's a lot of rare earths that are concentrated in sedimentary rocks, and or they're looking at ways to extract them with in situ leaching and things like that. All those things require a mining component, and in the coal industry, there's a lot of that material that's already been mined, and so I think they have an advantage in the economics there. And like we talked about, I mean, having electricity as a byproduct for concentrating rare earths is pretty compelling, especially with energy demand where it's at. I mean, I'm sure that's a big topic in your meetings is AI demand and energy center these big mega projects and the demand that they're going to have. There's massive energy demand, so I think that gives coal an advantage. But there will be, I mean, the mining industry is looking at tailings from copper mines, or looking at mine dumps from other types of mines and overburden and things like that for extracting rare earths. But generally, the concentrations are quite a bit lower than what we're seeing in coal and coal waste streams. So
interesting.
I think it's got the advantage. Yeah.
Well, I may yet live long enough to see electricity become the byproduct. We're coming toward the end of our session here, so if anybody does have a question and would like to throw it out there, now would be the time. I've got one more for you, Stuart. At one point in the discussion, we were talking about developments that we can expect in the next few years, but you also introduced me to a new term I hadn't heard before, the Lassonde curve.
Oh, yes.
Can you maybe explain a little bit more what the Lassonde curve is and reconcile those two statements for me, and get out your crystal ball and tell us how fast this market is going to develop?
Yeah, let me pull it up. It's a good visual. See if I can get it to pop up here. Yeah, so Lassonde is a economist, and he's been involved a lot in the mining industry over the years. And so he came up with this, and it really has aged well over the years. I'm not sure when he came up with it, but it's been around for a long time. I'll do a screen share again and show you. It's easier to talk about that way. Okay. So here it is. The Lassonde curve basically talks about the interest in a mining project and the value of a mining project. It's used a lot for public companies over its life cycle. So mines go through different cycles, from concept, which is basically, we think we have something here worth exploring for, to pre-discovery, which is kind of building a geological model, maybe some surface sampling, things like that, to discovery, where you've actually found something legitimate, to proving it up through the feasibility, which can take a really long time depending on the size of the project. Then you get into development, startup, and then depletion. As it goes through this, it goes through a curve of perceived value. So when it's a concept through pre-discovery, there's not a lot of interest. There's low value. It's an idea. Once a discovery is made, there's usually a big peak of speculation. And then there's a peak, usually around the time a project gets to a PEA level, or preliminary economic assessment, is kind of the peak where you'll see a stock or public interest, if it's a private company, kind of peak, and there's a lot of people interested. And then you get this orphan period where the rubber hits the road, you've made a discovery, and now you have to do all the work to prove out its feasibility. So that involves, when we talk about rare earths and some of these recovery projects, now we're at the peak of this Lassonde curve in the discovery phase, where there's projects. The Brook Mine's a great example. and this may explain some of this litigation as well. There's a discovery, there's a mine potentially, but now there's the feasibility. We got to prove out that it can be done. And so during this period, you get this lull where there's not a lot of interest, there's not a lot of value. And the Lassonde curve can be applied to a specific project or a company, but it can be extrapolated to a whole economic phase. Like you can apply this to AI. We've gone over the discovery phase, and now we're going into this kind of curve of despair, or valley of despair, as they like to call it, where the development happens. And then once the mine starts up and goes into production and the economics are proven, then it reaches the peak value through that lifetime when it's cash generating. And this can last anywhere from 5 years to 50 years, depending on the mine and the size of it. And then, of course, as the mine depletes, the value drops back down. And how far down it drops depends on how quick it depletes. But this is the Lassonde curve. So in this adoption of extracting rare earths from coal and coal byproducts, we're kind of in this peak area right here where there's a lot of interest. And I think we're entering this orphan period. So in the case of the Brook mine, now the investors are going, well, hey, wait, there was all this hype and excitement, and I heard all these billion-dollar numbers. Where are they? And I think a lot of the defense on that case is going to be explaining, well, here's where we're at. We're doing the feasibility and the development and that. And they did skip some. So they claimed a startup, but really it's a startup of a pilot plant, not the startup of the full facility. So they're kind of entering that lull here. But this is the Lassonde curve.
That's fascinating. Thank you for educating us on that. It's very similar to the technology in technology development. That's got that. It's that same kind of curve, and they call it the Valley of Death, right? You know,
the Valley of Death. Yeah,
I go from bench scale to pilot scale to demonstration scale, but then there's the Valley of Death before I can get to full commercial scale, because as everyone knows, you want to be the first person to build the fourth plant so that everybody else takes the risk out of it. So that's fascinating.
Yeah, very similar, and yeah, it can be applied. And some projects have additional curves and bumps along the way, but generally, this is a lot of what you see. So yeah, the overall rare earths in general in the U.S. were in that speculation, excitement, discovery phase, and then a lot of projects, depending on the commodity and what they're going after, are going to enter this orphan period soon. So, particularly antimony, I could see getting into there. Copper's a different story, but yeah.
Fascinating stuff. Well, thank you, Stuart. I don't see any other questions, and we're down to the bottom of the hour now, so we appreciate everybody being here. Little program note for next month: we're switching up the speakers on you again. Next month's on-track speaker is now going to be Carl Moore. Who's Chief Executive Officer of the PowerScope Global, who is PowerScape Global, coal gasification company, and it's one of those companies that's out there talking about building new coal fueled generation in the United States and elsewhere. So we'll have Carl with us to describe his technology and the outlook for possibly new coal plants in the U.S. We'll talk about that next month. In April, we will go on hiatus because you're all going to come down to Jekyll Island and see us in person, and do the thing in Jekyll Island. So there will be registration links in the on-track tomorrow. Melinda will be pounding your inbox. We encourage everybody to register and see us in Georgia in a couple of months. Stuart, thank you again very much for your time and participation on this. Very informative, and we may have you back at some point if you're amenable to it, to check that crystal ball again.
Yeah, sure. No, I appreciate it. It was fun.
Awesome. Hey, thank you so much, Stuart. Thanks, everybody.